Hi, this is Mike Young with Noble Warriors. You're about to hear a message entitled Darwin versus Design, presented by Joe Thompson. Joe's part of the Noble Warriors team in Chesterfield, Virginia. This workshop was presented as part of the Iron Sharpens Iron Men's Conference, hosted by Noble Warriors at Bonsack Baptist Church on Saturday, February 23, 2013. I pray the message will challenge and encourage you as you walk with Christ and lead your family.
Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started because we got a lot to go, and I don't want to run over. But let me kick this off by, first of all, I don't have any notes. My notes are all on that laptop back there, so I'm going to wing most of this stuff. So, first of all, I think I have to give a. I don't know, but it's not working. That will be a problem.
Steam up high. I'm back. Yeah, problem first. Yeah, the first class had the same.
All right. I'm going to back up a little bit now. It's high. Well, why do we do this? That's the first one. I want to give a disclaimer on this. First of all, there's lots of people out there who are a lot smarter than I am. I think we're eventually getting there, but I just don't know where that pickup is on this thing. Okay. And there's a lot. I mean, what you're going to see today is there's a lot of information here from creation science evangelism, or maybe creation today. You may have heard some of them, but there's lots of them out there, guys. You don't have to rely on any individual one of them. This is going to be a problem if it's this slow all day long. Jeff, I may ask for Josh to come back in here if we can, if this is going to be this slow. Because why do we do this? Well, I think 2 Peter 3:15 says, be prepared to give an answer for the reason that you have hope. And this is, come on guys.
Steam high.
How high? Into the ceiling?
In other words, towards the beam, but higher in elevation. No, not that way, the whole arm equal.
Oh, you mean this way?
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay. All right, evolutionists want you to think that the debate's over, or that you're the only moron in the world that doesn't believe in evolution, and that's just not true, guys. I want to tell you that's not true. We are never going to get through this at this rate. Here's a recent article in the Washington Times. It said 55% of U.S. natural scientists believe in Darwinian evolution. Notice that it didn't say 45% of scientists didn't believe in Darwinian evolution. Don't underestimate, the press always has a slant, and you need to be aware of that. If I put half of those guys in here, if I put 10 guys in here and said half you guys that believe in evolution get over there, the other half that don't, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now how is that if it's that solved that we have that many guys who don't understand? Science Digest says scientists who utterly reject evolution may be one of the fastest growing minorities. This was written in 1979. The numbers are a lot higher than that now. Now, how can that be? You guys may have done this before. What do you see in this picture? Do you see a young woman or an old lady? Most of you guys have been through this picture, right?
Yeah.
If you see the young woman, you kind of seeing her from back over her shoulder looking this way, and you see her chin here. I don't know whether that's going to come up or not. It's not going to come up on that one. As opposed to the old lady, you're looking at a direct profile. You're seeing this is her nose in the old lady. This is her chin, and looking at it this direction, okay? Same picture, two different people to see two different items there. I don't know if you've been through that or not, but I just wanted to share that with you. It says everybody's looking at the same data, but we're not seeing the same things. It's because the worldview that we have is what gives us this. Now, I like Dilbert. My wife used to give me a calendar every year. This one says, wow, you have 3 master's degrees and a PhD. Guy says, yes, it's all very impressive, but interestingly, I have no common sense whatsoever. And it said, that's not the kind of thing you should say in an interview. He said, I didn't even know why not, okay? I worked at Abbott Laboratories for 25 years, okay? There were 7,000 engineers and scientists at Abbott Laboratories. Brilliant people working on the latest and greatest drugs for heart disease, diabetes, cancer, whatever. Yet out of those guys, they would come up and say some of the craziest things. Just like, what is this? I don't understand how you can have one of those moments, all right? You're going to see a lot of that kind of understanding here as we progress through this. So you don't have to have a PhD to understand the evidence, all right? So what is truth? All right, we want to talk about truth today. If I were to toss you that and ask you, what is that? What would you tell me? How do you know that?
That's what I've always been told.
Anything that looks like that, has that shape, that color, that texture, that smell, right, is a banana, right? Now, I don't mean to be overly simplistic, but if you were to open it up, what would you expect to see? A potato or an orange? No, you expect a banana. Why? Because that's God's truth, right? We've come to rely on this so inherently, we don't even think about it. We think it's almost silly, but it's only silly because we rely on it so heavily, right? But it's kind of, it's a little bit different, isn't it? But what if you didn't want it to be a banana? What if you really, really, really wanted it to be a potato when you opened it up? Would that matter? No, right? Right? But if I really, really, really don't want that to be a banana, it has no impact on it, right? Our opinion doesn't make any difference on what God's opinion is, right? It doesn't. Now, no matter how bad we want that, it's not going to change anything, right? That's God, all right? You can count on God over and over and over again. If he has something in that shape, it's going to be a banana, right? Well, that's something we can count on. That's the truth that we really meet, and that's God's nature. So if, and another example of this might be, for instance, let's just say, God doesn't jerk us around and have gravity on some days and not on others, right? We can count on that. He doesn't have photosynthesis work sometime and not other times, right? That's God. That is the nature of God. He's the ultimate source of truth, right? Now, what about man? Is that guy standing over there in the $5,000 Armani suit, is he rich? Well, maybe. Maybe not, too, right? Why do we have 1 million Americans a year going bankrupt? Because they want you to think that they're rich when they're really not rich, right? They want you to give an impression that they're rich. That's man. So, we can use this ultimate source of truth of God to discover what he's talking about. The Bible says, what's the reason Jesus came into the world? To testify to the truth, right? John 18 says, for this reason I was born, and I came into the world to testify to the truth. It's interesting. Jesus talked in kind of a little different kind of way. Jesus started a whole lot of his sentence with, I tell you the truth. You remember reading that? Over 100 times in the Gospels, Jesus talks about, I tell you the truth. He starts a sentence with, I tell you the truth. Do you think he's trying to make a point? Right? Now, who said, if you tell a lie long enough, loud enough, and often enough, the people will believe it? Anybody know who said that? Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler also said people are more likely to believe a big lie than a small lie. Now, if you mix in, how do you do this? If you mix in a little bit of truth with your lie, you'll get people so confused they can't sort out what's truth and what's fact and what's fiction and everything else, and then you can tie them up for years with a little bit of truth mixed in with the lie. So, there are two ways we can go here. There are two, essentially. Creationists would say that in the beginning, God created. The evolutionist timeline would say in the beginning, nothing. Okay? So this is what we're going to look at a little bit here. I want to start out, what is the one thing Darwin did not talk about in his book, The Origin of Species, and the slide's already so screwed up, it's not going to catch that. But he didn't talk about the origin of any species. Isn't that kind of a deceptive title when he says his name of his book is The Origin of Species, and he didn't really talk about the origin of species? Why? He didn't have a clue. Okay? He really didn't know. Evolution is a shell game with a problem. There's no P under any of them. The biologists think the geologists have got all the evidence, and the geologists think the astronomers have the evidence. The astronomers think the chemists, and the paleontologists, and nobody knows who's got the evidence for evolution. And it's just a shell game. Now, it's interesting. We've been told for decades that evolution is a fact, right? It's taught in all our schools. It's been taught there now for 50 years. The question I would have is, do the facts really support that position? Anybody know who this guy is? Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan is he used to be the mouthpiece for evolutionists. He had to show that billions and billions of years ago, something happened. Well, in his book, he said, evolution is a fact amply demonstrated by the fossil record and by contemporary molecular biology. Anybody see what Carl just did there? It's a shell game.
He used
Right.
everything but his own field.
That's right. His field is astronomy. But he's going to tell you the evidence for it's a fact is because of these two other fields. Right? Everybody knows that it's not in their field. Let's say it's in somebody else's field. So let's just take a look. Let's start first of all with contemporary molecular biology. And we'll start with DNA since that's one of the most recent findings in biology. DNA molecule is one of the most complex molecules we've ever discovered. It is the most complex molecule, and we're not going to go into this too deep, but I just want to show you something. It said the probability, the mathematical probability of DNA forming and arranging itself by itself has been calculated at 1 chance in 10 to the 119,000th power. Now, I know some of you guys aren't math majors, and I can't even wrap my head around that big a number, but let me give you something for comparison. The entire visible universe is 10 to the 28 inches in diameter. That'll give you some feel for the possibility of DNA arranging itself by itself. DNA formed by chance is just not an intelligent statement. This is not a very accommodating. I wonder if we got, would you see if you can find me another battery for this thing? I don't know whether that's the issue or not.
Sure. You know what size it is, Joe?
I have no idea, but I'd guess double A's, but you might have to ask Josh. Here's a guy who's very respected, Paul Davies. He's actually now at the Arizona State University, I think. He says, nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell. Now, these are not necessarily, these guys aren't all Christians, I mind you. Come on. Well, we'll just skip, we'll go. If all it takes is to have all the right molecules, all the right proteins, all the right components in the right place and let them form out of a probiotic soup, then try this on for size. Put a frog in a blender and turn the switch on. Now, I'm not trying to gross anybody out in here, but if I did that, won't all the right proteins, won't all the right molecules, won't all the right atoms be there in that goo, green goo to form a frog? Right? It's there. How long do you think it's going to take for that green goo to turn into a frog?
Not gonna happen.
It's not going to happen. I need to keep moving here somehow. God says in Genesis 17, all creatures have the breath of life in them. That's the difference between a frog bouncing around in your backyard and that one in the goo. Breathe the breath of life into them. I don't know if there's another one or not, but take a shot real quick. From conception until birth, a human baby adds 15,000 cells per minute to its body, and each one of those cells is more complex than a space shuttle. Getting the handle on the complexity and the difficulty of the subject matter here a little bit, guys? While we're waiting on that, anybody have any questions real quick? No?
Wrong side. I'm gonna fix something for you.
All right.
This is an old trick. Go ahead. You're doing great.
Well, I don't have anything else to talk. Oh, one only has to comment. This is George Wald. Now, this is a guy who's actually a Nobel Prize winner. I want to read to you what he said. He talked about. We need to back up one slide if we can. I think. Can we back up? Okay. No, go forward. I'm sorry. What we're talking about. Keep one more. What we're talking about is spontaneous generation. Now, George Wald, in his book, The Origin of Life, he said, one only has to contemplate the magnitude of the task to concede spontaneous generation of a living cell, a living organism, is impossible. All right? Yet here we are as a result, I believe in spontaneous generation. Think about that statement. This guy is one of those brilliant scientists. He's a Nobel winner. Okay, next slide. He also continued, he said, most modern biologists, having reviewed with satisfaction the downfall of spontaneous generation hypothesis, yet unwilling to accept the alternative belief in special creation, are left with nothing. I think a science has no choice but to approach the origin of life through the hypothesis of spontaneous generation. Is that one of those brilliant moments they came up with? Now, this guy's a Nobel laureate. All right? This is how the thinking goes. Keep going. Is that science? Or is that religion of their own? Next slide. I like this cartoon. It's well known in science circles. It says here, I think you should be a little more explicit here in step 2 where a miracle occurs. Every scientist has to postulate this as reality because they have no other evidence other than that. Go ahead. Next slide. Does the Bible talk about this debate, evolution versus creation, and you know it does. If you've read your Bible at all, you know it does. Jeremiah 2:27 says, "Who says to a tree, you are my father, or unto a stone, you gave me birth?" Next. James 3 says, "Can a fig tree, my brethren, produce olives, or a vine produce figs? Neither can salt water produce fresh water." Next one. Keep going. Go ahead. One more. Go ahead. Now, do this fairly rapidly. I think most people like to think of evolution, hit the button pretty rapidly as we progress through this whole series slide. This is how I think most evolutionists would want us to believe what really happened. Now, I don't need a lot of emails and stuff, guys. We're just having a little fun here. But I think that's how a lot of guys would like us to think about how evolution occurs. Flip to the next slide. This is the cover of National Geographic. You need to understand these guys have to keep this in front of you. Every month or 6 months or something, they've got to keep this word in front of you to keep you believing this lie. Go ahead, next, keep going. This is the first pioneer. Flip. If you believe that this is the first pioneer, somebody's trying to make a monkey out of you, not just Bill Clinton. Okay, keep going. A conservative estimate. Now, this is a guy who wrote this. He's a mathematician. He is not a Christian or even a believer. He says a conservative estimate suggests that at least 50,000 morphological changes are required to change from one species to the other. Keep going. We've got two, the first and the last. Where are the other 49,998? Go ahead. Okay. Natural selection selects. But it selects from an existing option, right? If I have a dog and I want to pull out some genes of this thing, I can't pull down wings, right? If I have a fish, I cannot pull out lungs as one of the options to choose from. It cannot generate something new. As a matter of fact, I think that typical natural selection thing is long gone. It's called Darwinism. I think most scientists would agree that isn't the way it happens. They call it neo-Darwinism now, which means mutation, through mutation, okay? But all the scientific studies says all the mutations that you see are inferior to the original mutations. We can talk more about some other things, so we're going to flip through this really pretty quick. If evolution is true, it seems fairly logical that the more chromosomes an organism would have would be further evolved. Since penicillin has 2 chromosomes, it must have evolved first. All right, keep going. Keep going. Just fly right until you get the whole list up here. Keep going. Now, keep one more hit. A housefly and a tomato have the same number of chromosomes. That's interesting. And I thought it was a whole lot more difficult for a fly to be around than a tomato, but not according to this. Keep going. Keep one more hit. Now this might explain why there's so many possums on a road. I don't know. One more. Keep going. Hit a couple. All right. That cigarette you're smoking, you're not quite as bright as that cigarette you're smoking. Next one. We got twins here, a dog and a chicken. Keep going. And then someone says that you're dumb as a stick. It might take on a different meaning here nowadays. So, next slide. If amphibians evolved before mammals, why do some amphibians have 5 times more DNA than mammals, and some amoeba have 1,000 times? Now, see, that's from a Scientific American. That's not from the Journal of Christianity out there. Next slide. So, DNA has done something for us that most people don't want to talk about. And this is what's interesting. This is just in U.S. News and World Report came out. It says, virtually all modern men, 99% of them, share a common gene with one male ancestor they dub Y chromosome Adam, that go back to a very recent ancestor. Duh. Next slide. Right? We are all related to one man who lived in Asia in about 1415 BC. Duh. Anybody here know? Everyone in the world is related. No, you're fine. No, go ahead. Now, there's a female marker that's only found in females. It's called mitochondrial. And the mitochondrial DNA mutation rate showed that a common ancestor about 300 generations ago, taken about 20 years of generation, it's about 6,000 years. Next slide. Well, if that's true, that would indicate that Eve lived about 6,500 years ago. Now, a figure that is clearly incompatible with current theories on human origin. They're clearly incompatible with whose theories of origin? Next slide. Next. Hit one more. That would seem to dial in there pretty good with what the Bible says about where our origin started. How about versus the evolutions? Hit one more slide there. Instead of man being evolved 3 billion years ago. Which one makes more sense to you with the evidence you just seen? Francis Crick, who was the co-discoverer of DNA, made this comment. Says, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what we see was not designed but rather evolved. Now, why would you have to tell somebody that? If it's obvious, it's obvious. Why does it say it's not designed, it's not designed, it's not designed, it's evolved? Why do I have to tell very intelligent, college-educated PhD candidates? Next slide. Go ahead. Not true. Not from the evidence that I've seen. Next slide. God did not put two babies in a garden with a bag of seeds and tell them get to work, right? They were fully developed and mature, and so was the garden. Next, go ahead. Next slide. Now, understanding this debate is critical, okay? This is something that I really want you to catch on. Go ahead, give me that. Again, this is George Wald talking, who's a Nobel laureate. He said, time is in fact the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible, probable, and the probable, virtually certain. One only has to wait, and time itself performs the miracles. That is one of the most brilliant guys on the planet. He went from impossible to virtually certain with absolutely not a single shred of evidence. Okay? Next. Without millions and millions and billions of years, evolution has no hope. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Go ahead. How old is the Earth? Well, in the beginning, give me a slide hit there. It says that in the beginning, nothing. The Earth forms about 4.6 billion years ago. So, let's go with that. I'm going to set the scene here. If we are treasure hunters, let me just give you an analogy here. If we're treasure hunters looking for our sunken treasure of gold, and let's just say we finally stumble upon this bullion. Next slide. And in there we find a set of gold coins. Flip the next 3 or 4 for me if you would. In there we see a coin from 1750, one from 1710, and one from 1695. One more hit. What or when did the boat sink? You have, is that? I don't have it. Okay.
Sometime after.
All right. Well, you may not be able to know exactly when it sank. You know when it did not sink, right? It did not sink before 1750 because there's a coin on there of 1750. This is vitally important for you to understand this. It says because if just one young Earth hypothesis is true, the Earth cannot be any older than that. Right? Follow that? It's critically important to understand. If just one young Earth hypothesis is true, the Earth cannot be any older than that. So let's take a look at that real quick. Textbooks will tell you that the Earth is billions of years old, but not always. In 1770, it was 70,000 years old. In 1905, it was officially 2 billion years old. In 1969, it was 3.5 billion years old. And today, this is a teacher's book that says, stress that the Earth is thought to be at least 4.5 billion years old. Now, why do I have to tell them that? If it's obvious, it shouldn't have to stress that to the teachers that are teaching. That's right out of a textbook one of your kids has learned from. Science textbooks are always being revised every couple of years as new science is discovered and new happenings. In fact, this has been happening ever since the Gutenberg press was invented. By the way, what was the first book that was ever printed on the Gutenberg press? The Bible. How often do they have to revise what the Bible says? So how do we come to this understanding that we think that the Earth is very old? Okay? Well, back in the 1830s, a guy named Charles Lyell really didn't like the theory or the belief that the Earth was young, and wasn't really a follower of Christianity or belief. And he actually wrote a series of 3-volume set of books that basically said the layers of the rock were different years in age, and from that it was theorized that the fossils that contained in them then must be millions of years old, and that represented this sorting that evolution is credited with giving. Now, they came up with what's called the geological column, and they named each one of these layers of rock. Now, and you might see some things you recognize in there: Jurassic, maybe you've heard of Cambrian. Those are all different ages of rock, and they gave them an age. And then they said, okay, let's go from there. So this is what's called the geologic column. The further down you go, the older it gets. Now, I want to show you up here at the top, this is the succession of life, all right? Supposedly from clams and mussels and stuff up there through very top, we'll get to man. Now, this is where they make the statement, the rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks much more accurately. This circular reasoning, you know, I date the rock because I know what fossils in it, but because the fossil's there, that's what I know the age of the rock is. You know, they can't avoid this circular reasoning, and that's one of the things you can call them out on. This would say that if I'm buried above a teddy bear, then I descended from the teddy bear. Okay, this is how that works, all right? So if I'm buried, and this happens all the time, guys, this is what I'm telling you. They'll tell you, they'll dig up some skull or something, they'll say, oh, this is 3 million years old. Then they'll go dig a little deeper and say, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't fit. So this must not be 3 million years old. This is only like, oh, 70,000. It's just hoo-ha, guys. It's just malarkey. It's amazing. Now, way back in 1787, Thomas Jefferson said something. It's interesting. He says, the moment a person forms a theory, his imagination sees in every object only the traits which favor that theory. Now, here's a guy who is the curator at the American Museum of Natural History. He's an evolutionist. He's not a Christian guy. He said the patterns we perceive are as likely to result from our unconscious mindset as they are from evidence itself. Now, Richard Leakey, who is Louis Leakey's son, and Louis Leakey is one of the most famous anthropologists out there, or archaeologists, I'm sorry. He said he admitted this when his dad used to rearrange the stuff when well, that doesn't fit, so I'll move this around and shuffle this around to fit his theory. Now here's a classic example of what evolutionists want you to think about the geologic column. Nice straight strata, that's the Grand Canyon. But what would they think of this? This is actually the West Virginia Turnpike, not too far from here. I don't know whether you can see it on the thing. That little thing down there is a minivan, right? You can see it at the bottom of the screen? There's a road cut from there. Now, solid rocks don't bend. I could ask a kindergartner, hand them a rock and say, hey, bend this for me, would you? And they say, no, they don't bend. They're only going to break. Well, how do they bend this? Didn't all those layers have to be soft and malleable at the same time so that when forces acted on them, they did bend? What would they do with this? Can you bend a solid rock like that? Can anything bend a solid rock without breaking? Do you really want me to believe that all those rock layers are different ages, or they were not all deposited at the same time? I would take you to a child's toy. Anybody seen one of these 2 plates of glass with some sand and liquid in there, and you flip it over and you get this nice little layering effect? It takes about what, 90 seconds maybe to do that? I'd flip it over again, that's what I get. Right? How do we explain what's called a polystrate tree? And do you see these trees? They're all in different layers of rock. Are you wanting to tell me that tree, top of that tree is, 100 million years old, and the bottom of that tree is 400 million years old? Did it not rot sitting up there for 400 million years, or even 10 years? Did it not rot? We find these polystrate trees all over the world. European continent, over here to US, down in Australia. Here's one I think is really interesting. Here's a fish that was buried vertically. The head of the fish was in a 100,000-year-old rock different than the tail of the fish. Just stood there pretty stilted, didn't rot or corrode. Here's a 30-foot petrified tree. The top is in one coal seam dated thousands of years different than the bottom. So, here's where man is supposed to come in. Very, very, very late in the game of evolution. And this is what Richard Dawkins said. Now, Richard Dawkins is probably today's mouthpiece for evolution. Here's what he said. If a single well-verified mammal skull were to turn up in 500 million-year-old rocks, our whole modern theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. He said this. I didn't. Here's humans way up at the top the last couple 100,000 years. And here's where we found artifacts in all the different rock strata. Now, how can that be? You guys can't see that very well, but I will tell you what some of the stuff we found in here is a human chain, a chain necklace in about 300-million-year-old rock. We've found skulls, bones, feet. Let's take a look at some. Here's a human handprint from a crustacean rock. It's 110 million years old. Now you can see the fingernails. That's how accurate, how detailed that imprint is. Here's another hand found in another crustacean rock that was 110 million years old. Now, man's not supposed to be here yet, remember? Here's a footprint in a crustacean rock. Sounds like to me that Humans were around 100 million years old. Now here's a sandaled footprint. This little, I don't know whether you can pick this up or not, this little round thing over here, that's called a trilobite. Now the trilobite is supposed to be one of the first organisms to ever evolve on the Earth. Alright? It's supposed to be 500 million years ago. Now here's a human footprint, not only just a human footprint, but he's got a sandal on. How long ago were we supposed to put sandals on our feet? Alright? It's just another example where a human footprint should never have been. Here's a rock, here's a hammer in 400 million year old rock. I don't know whether the amoeba were making them hammers at that time or not, but here's a silver vessel found in 600 million year old rock. Here's I like this, an iron pot found on a lump of coal in 1912 at an electric plant in Oklahoma. Now, you know coal's supposed to be 40 million years old, right? So here's another waiter's bell in a lump of coal, 1944. Guy still got it. Over in Australia, the Australian government gave about $22 million to create oil from sludge. 30 minutes. Here is turkey guts. I used to work in a poultry industry at one time. They're trying to convert turkey guts into Texas light crude in about 30 minutes. They tell you it takes millions and millions of years for oil to form. The president of the company said, we duplicate what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. Here's a piece of petrified wood that's been chopped. Millions of years to petrify. Here's a petrified pickle. Here's a petrified cowboy boot with the legs still in it. If you flip that boot over, it says 1950 on it. I hope this is one of the slides that stick in your craw and just bug the heck out of you. My wife and I went to Carlsbad Caverns, and they tell us 250 million years to create the Carlsbad Caverns. I don't know if you guys have been to the Lincoln Memorial, but if you go into the basement of Lincoln Memorial, it was built in 1922. So this picture was taken in 1962. Here's a 50-inch stalactite in 40 years. Take millions of years to form Luray Cavern? I don't think so. At the current rate of erosion, continents would erode flat in about 14 million years. How can we have rocks 300 million years old and still be above sea level? And the other part about that is there's about 80,000 tons flowing down the Mississippi River of silt an hour. 80,000 tons. There ought to be a huge pile of silt at the mouth of the Mississippi, but there's not. Why not? The most that could be there would be 30,000 years. Now, an interesting waterfalls, this is Niagara Falls, they're kind of interesting. They erode backward. As the water flows over, they actually erode backward, and you can kind of measure that. It's like every waterfall is erode backward. And I'd like to show you here, this is showing the Niagara Falls in 1764, in 1819, in 1842, in 1873, in 1805. You can just watch it grow backward, right? Well, if the Earth is millions of years old, why is Niagara Falls only eroded 8 miles? The oceans today are 3.6% salt. They could have gone from fresh water to 3.6 in less than 5,000 years. Off the Great Barrier Reef, a lot of destruction during World War II with bombs and ships and everything falling from World War II. They just watched it grow and then looked backward. It's only 4,200 years old. Major writing systems. Why is it that when we find writing systems, they seem to be very developed? He said the first developed writing systems of word writing appeared only about 5,000 years ago. That's Encyclopedia Britannica. It said the oldest language that can be restructured is already modern, sophisticated, and complete from an evolutionary standpoint. Isn't that a little strange that you'd have a hard start? People wouldn't start by going, that's a word somewhere, I don't know, grunting, and then they write grunt, whatever. Why is it that it's fully developed when it starts and it's a hard start on it, right? Does that make sense to you? Chinese year 2000 was 4,700 on the Chinese calendar. Maybe they started with the birth of Shem or Noah. On the Hebrew calendar, the year 2000, our year 2000, was 5760 on the Hebrew calendar. Why would that be? The Saxons in England have genealogy going back to Adam. The Danes and Norwegians have lists that go back to Noah. If you want to read more about that, there is a book out there. I didn't mean to blow by it. It's called After the Flood by Bill Cooper. Last week's population topped 7 billion. This is from just 2011, not that long ago, right? 7 billion. If I take that and calculate know what the birth rates are and things, I can actually take it backward and see what the population should have been. Well, interesting, if the population growth rate were charted backward, the result would be a handful of people alive around 4,500 years ago. Anybody know what happened 4,500 years ago? Flood. There's a bottleneck back there 4,500 years ago. On the other hand, if a monkey stood up and called himself a man, and had a female stand up with him at the same time and call herself a woman, and they started reproducing at 3 million years ago, well, they should have generated that many offspring. I can't pronounce it. I couldn't tell you what the population should be. 10 by 40, add 43 zeros after it. That's what the population should be accordingly. And the evolutionists know this. There's a problem here. There's a bottleneck in the past. So what do? Well, scientists are now putting forth a theory that 70,000 years ago there was a huge catastrophe that reduced the human population to a few thousand. It would make Mount St. Helens explosion out there in 1980 look like a pop gun, okay? The type of explosion that was required there. Now, why do you have to create a catastrophe when there's already one written in our history books? It's called the flood. Well, let's talk about the flood just real quick. There are over 270 flood legends around the world. Interesting. Why would there be no evidence other than that? Why would different cultures, different places around the world all have the same history of there was a flood somewhere in the past? This one in Hawaii, I just thought it was kind of interesting. There was a good man left. His name was Kunihana, the first man. The world became a wicked, terrible place. There was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. Sounded like Noah to me. I don't know. It's good to get there, right? Only Nu'u and his family were saved, is the way the legend goes. Here's one in China. The Chinese called him Fuhi. They considered him to be the father of their civilization. Fuhi, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters escaped the Great Flood, and they were the only people, and they were told to repopulate the world. Here's one in Mexico, and I actually had a plant when I was working with Abbott down in Mexico. It's called the Toltec Indians, and I'm kind of roll through here real quick. It's interesting to me because we were building a new plant in Tlalpan, and it's interesting the history and stuff down there. But it says 520 years after the Great Flood, the Toltec Indians said the first world lasted 1,716 years and was destroyed by a great flood that covered the mountains and covered the highest mountain. Only one guy named Kakaks, Nu'u, Noah. Interesting. The Bible dates the flood about 1,650 years after creation, and it's only off the Toltec myth is only 4,000. It was off 60 years after 4,000 years. We found evidence. The Gilgamesh, you guys maybe are familiar with. This is actually a clay tablet talking about the Gilgamesh through the Great Flood. There's evidence out there. Geological evidence for a global flood. We're not going to go into all of these. We don't have time to go into all of them, but I want to just show you a couple of them. Anybody that's ever been on the beach, Virginia Beach or the Outer Banks or anything, when you walk down the beach, you notice that clams are all open, right? They open when they die, right? They're still alive, they stay closed. Why would we find 10, 20, 30 feet thick of closed clams on the top of Mount Everest? Here's an oyster 11.5 feet wide found on 2 miles above sea level down in South America. We find massive, when I say massive, I mean massive graveyards all over the world, all around the world. It's in Europe, in the US, and other places. There are almost 1 trillion fossils in some of these graveyards, or in some of these fossil beds. The question is why? Did all these animals know where to go die? About the time they age out, they could go over here and die, right? Is that logical? Or would we look at the evidence of when we see a flood, the tsunami in Japan, or a flood here in the United States or in Bangladesh or wherever else it is, and they sweep everything and anything out from during that flood and deposit it somewhere. Is that more logical? Why would we find all these in the same place? Burial is so rapid that soft flesh deals. Now, interesting, here's a fin and eyes. You can pick out the minutest detail on some of these fossils. Like this compound lens on this one. And how about a jellyfish? It doesn't have bones. Right? There are no bones, it's just jelly. Right? There's no bones to fossilize. Here's one buried so rapidly they're caught in the act of eating another fish or giving birth. There's evidence that's out there. Here's another one of those called the Wave over in it's in State Park just on the Utah-Arizona border. Here's a better picture of it. When they found the sand, and they analyzed the sand here, they found out the sand is not from the Rocky Mountains, it's from the Appalachian Mountains. What is this amazing rock formation doing with sand from the Appalachians? No answer. The Grand Canyon. This is the better evidence for a flood than slow erosion. And the reason why, the snow line tells the story here, guys. Where does snow fall first?
Higher elevation.
Higher elevations. In the mountains, right? Here's a satellite photograph. Look at the snow in the mountains. Now, if you've ever been out to the Grand Canyon, you know that if you're standing on the north rim, you're about 8,800 feet above sea level. If you're on the south rim, you're about 6,800 feet above sea level. Think about that a minute. You don't have to trust me. Go to Google, Google up the Grand Canyon, and click on that over there. Click on the what's the terrain, and it'll give you the elevations. Look at the elevations of the Grand Canyon. Now it's interesting. The Colorado River enters about the state line there with Colorado at 2,100 feet above, or 2,800 feet, travels about 270 miles, and exits at 1,800 feet. Since when does water flow uphill? Here's a profile of it. This would be like the north. That is the higher ridge up there would be like the north rim or the south rim. Water enters down here and flows out down here. Now, how did it get up there to erode the top of the mountaintop or the kebab lift? Doesn't make any sense, right? Well, if you were to block off, right, where the Colorado River comes into the state of Arizona, we would show you some evidence of this Grand Lakes they're talking about. There would be on the general vicinity size of the Great Lakes. Okay, that's how it would cover 4 states. All right, is there any evidence of this? Well, they actually had built a dam right on that same spot. It's called the Glen Canyon Dam. And if you notice, and I wish I could point this out here, there's water coming out right at the bottom of the base of the dam. You can see those water jets coming out. They had a big snow in 1983. And we actually just happened to be out there this time frame. My wife and I were on our honeymoon out here. They were releasing water out there. And all of a sudden, they just hear the earth shaking. It's just rumbling, roaring, and they say, something's not right. And they shut down the pumps. And this is what they found. See this little hole at the top there? That's where one of those pipes was supposed to be. In a matter of seconds, that's 35 feet from the bottom of this of solid rock. Eroded in a matter of seconds. Not millions of years, not hundreds of years, whatever. Now, you've also seen this up at Mount St. Helens. This is actually, if I put a person, again, I can't put a person on these screens, but if there was a person standing right down here, that's 150 feet from here to up there. That, again, as Mount St. Helens exploded, it clogged up all the rivers until the water backed up enough until it burst. In a matter of minutes, it carved a 150-foot chunk. So let's take a quick look at radiometric dating, or carbon-14. A lot of you guys have heard that. If we look at that just quickly, on the periodic chart, you see that carbon and nitrogen are side by side. And if I could just plunk a little proton out of the nitrogen molecule, I would actually get carbon-14. And that's actually how it happens, is we get cosmic rays beating down on the Earth. There's some nitrogen in the atmosphere, and it just plunks a couple of those out. It actually generates maybe about 21 pounds of C14 a year. There's a different thing at it. Here's a different view. As you see the solar winds whipping across our magnetic field, this is how we generate carbon-14. And I'm not expecting you guys to memorize this stuff, but what happens is part of that carbon, and the carbon dioxide, a very, very small amount of it gets a proton knocked out and generates carbon-14. And what happens then is during photosynthesis, the plants breathe in this CO2 that's got some small particles of C14 in it, exhales them out, and then animals eat this, and they take that and they ingest that into their system. And then when they die, or the plant dies or the animal dies, they stop ingesting any more C14. So what the C14 now starts to decay, right? And we're going to go out of balance with what's in the rest of the atmosphere. And that's what they're measuring in this. That's really all that's involved in C14. Now, it has a half-life of about 5,700 years. And it goes out of balance, and this is how we say, okay, well, at 0 years, you'd have that much C14, 5,700 that much, and you can just kind of follow that along. But a key assumption for this is that the amount of C14 in the atmosphere has always been the same. You have to assume that, because if it's not, then you don't get to measure the difference, right? Well, it's been calculated it would take about 30,000 years for the Earth's atmosphere to reach equilibrium. Once it starts this process, it's going to 30,000 years for it to settle out and everything is in steady state motion. Well, we know the Earth's millions of years old, so we don't really need to worry about this, right? We could ignore that equilibrium problem. There's one problem with that. It has not reached equilibrium yet. Okay? Radiocarbon 14 is forming about 30% faster than it's decaying. That's measurable. Here's where it comes a problem, though. We start measuring things, and here we got this woolly mammoth measured. Its one leg is 15,000 radiocarbon years, and the skin and flesh on the same animal, 21,000 carbon years. That happened in 1949 when they invented the technology. Now, a couple of years later, it said, okay, here's a living moss that's still alive. They dated it at 2,300 years old. That's 1963. They haven't fixed the problem yet. A few years later, here's actually a freshly killed seal was dated at 1,300 years, and that's in 1971. We still haven't got it straight. Until we finally heard this report that says if C14 data supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict it, then we put it in a footnote. And if it's completely out of date with what we were looking for, we just drop it. My question will be, completely out of date with what? A preconceived notion of what it's supposed to be? Some Russian scientists dated a couple of dinosaur bones at under 30,000 years. A couple of years later, a guy in Columbus, Ohio did the same thing. He dated dinosaur bones at 20,000 years. How do you do that? Well, the samples weren't identified as dinosaur bones first. If I tell them it's dinosaur bone, I already have an idea how old it's supposed to be, right? Do I bias the data by knowing that? Now, this is a kind of a quick, I want to do this just quickly. If this is kind of the half-life, and you see that the half-life, it's going to decay. If the entire Earth was all one big blob of C14, it would completely decay out in about 50,000 years. Less than 1 million for sure, right? No C14 atom should exist in any carbon older than 250,000 years. Yet it's impossible. We cannot find anything that doesn't have traces of C14 in it. No stones, nothing. Nothing under the Pleistocene age. Well, here's the Pleistocene age way up at the top of that chart. And what they're saying is, all that stuff should be long gone before I ever get into somewhere anywhere close to that. Diamonds, the hardest substance on the Earth, they're supposed to be billions of years old. Somebody did a study here recently, took 12 diamonds, and they still got C14 in diamonds. Are diamonds really billions of years old? I don't think so. Some things you ought to keep in mind. If you know the age of the sample, radioisotope dating doesn't work. If you don't know the age of the radio, it's assumed to work. We know that the Earth's magnetic field has been decreasing. You can measure that. We've measured that, all right? It's getting weaker. That means more stuff's getting through. That means C14 is changing, right? It cannot be billions of years old. The maximum the Earth could be would be 25,000. Carbon dating really can't work if that doesn't hold true and doesn't stay put, all right? Radiometric dating would not have even been feasible if the geologic column hadn't been erected first. Here's an interesting comment. Ever since the 19th century, fossils have been, and still are, the best and most accurate method of dating because it correlates to where the rock is. That fits the theory, right? They're always comparing this to, well, the fossil, I know how old the fossil is, so this must be wrong. scientific evidence shows that evolution is wrong about the age of the Earth. Well, let's move a little bit here quickly to the missing link. This guy, again, not a Christian. I just like what he says. It's the most misleading phrase to talk about the missing link because it suggests only one link is missing. It'd be more accurate to say that the greater part of the chain is missing so much that it's not even certain whether there's a chain at all. Not a Christian, okay? Now, even Charles Darwin said, you know, we should be finding these intermediate species, the transitional fossils, the missing links. He said, why is not every geological formation and every stratum of rock full of such of these intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such of this thing, and if this must be the greatest objection that can be urged against my theory if we can't find some of these. Now, how he dispelled this was basically said, well, the geological record is very imperfect right now. We're just in the infancy of discovering fossils. And he's right, he's true. There were not a lot of fossils found in that time. So, but his comment was, if we don't find them, then you can rightly reject his whole theory. Well, I may be dead, but you can tell you everything I need to know. Think about this. When you find a fossil in the dirt, what can it tell you? Who its children are? No. What spouse looked like? No. What it ate for lunch? No. When it died? No. Where it died? No. How it died? No. That it's dead? Yes. That's about all you can tell when you find a fossil in the dirt. All right? If you find one in there, you don't know if it had any kids. You don't know if it produced a different kind of kid. All you really know is it's dead. Right? So why would evolutionists claim that bones in the dirt can do something that living animals cannot do, and that's produce a different kind? No fossil would be allowed in our legal system in a court of law. So, here, 1922, this is Nebraska man, and it's his wife. I always like how your wife looks like them. You know, they always draw that up, and he always looks like you. Now, he was scientifically built from one tooth. Now, my wife's a very good jigsaw puzzle. She's very good at it, but I can't tell you the best jigsaw puzzle people in the world cannot put together that man right there from one tooth, right? This is how that gets done. Okay, if I were to find, and I want to concentrate right now on this skeleton right here. This is the sperm whale. If I found that skeleton, that's probably, if I wrapped a little skin around it, that's what it should look like. But this is the actual what a sperm whale looks like, right? Well, if I took the same skull, I could put, an artist rendering could tell me, well, I could get either the top guy or the bottom guy. As a matter of fact, when they gave that skull to 9 different artists, they came up with 9 different looks. Understand how this artistic rendering takes place? It's an artist, it's all in the artist's mind. Here, National Geographic gave 7 bones, these 7 bones, and asked them to come up with, somehow they told them it was a female. I don't know how they knew it was female from those bones, but they come up with 4 different artists, come up with 4 different looks. Evolutionists, hall of shame. We don't have time to go through everything, but we are going to look at some of these. Ernest Haeckel said a turning point in his life when he read Charles' Origin of Species thing, and he did what's called Haeckel's embryos. And this is what he produced back in 1874. He produced all these different embryos to look like it. The only problem was they were faked. That's what the actual things look like. The embryos, actually, in reality, that's what he drew, and that's what he said. And by the way, this is probably still in your kids' textbooks today. That's the actual reality. Now, when he got caught, he was on trial, he said, a small percentage of my embryonic things are forgeries, you know, and I was just trying to fill in the missing links. Well, that's what we're looking for, and you're drawing them, just to whatever you want them to be like. Here's the most damning statement for it. It said, I should feel utterly condemned were it not that hundreds of the best observers and biologists lie under the same charge. What a damning statement that is to all of the scientists in that realm. Here's Nebraska man. I want to show you the real Nebraska man is right there. It was an extinct pig's tooth, as they later found out. Here, and I don't know how many times we've heard it, here's Darwin's theory is proved true. I don't know how many times you've seen articles that say that Darwin's theory is proved true. This is New York Times in December 1912. Darwin's theory proved true. This is Piltdown man. Now, it's interesting. There was the guy that found this was actually knighted by the King of England for this discovery and the advancement of science he did. There's only one problem. Matter of fact, it was also used in the Scopes monkey trial. This is the one they were referring to. Only one problem. It was an intentional fraud. He colored up the teeth with potassium to make them look old. He actually had the jawbone of a 50-year-old monkey. Intentional fake. Here's Lucy. Now, I was in high school when Lucy was found, 1974. I remember this very distinctly. Here's one of those cases again. You take that bones, those are the actual bones. Can you get that skull from those bones? I can. Right? Notice, no hands or no feet. No bones from the hands or feet are found on Lucy. Yet this is Lucy's display on the St. Louis Zoo. I don't think it's about educating, it's indoctrinating. Now, a guy called him out on this. One of the scientists at the local university called him and says, it's a complete misrepresentation, and I believe they know it is a misrepresentation. Here was their response. Zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. That's my quotation. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think the overall impression this one creates is true. Correct. How about Neanderthal man? This is the one that kind of got me as a kid. Is that Neanderthal man? Because he had a hunchback or scoliosis? I mean, you know, this guy's alive today. These are 3 different skulls from Aborigines, European, and Flathead Indian. I can see why they call the Flathead Indians Flathead, by the way. It seems pretty obvious looking at the skull. But tell me you've got more than a raised eyebrow for a Neanderthal man. What would they do with this guy if they found his fossils down the road? We come in all shapes and sizes, and what God says is though we need to love those people. And I think they all need Jesus. This, I actually was sitting in my office when I first saw this flash. This was a professor. This is 2006. This is very, very recently. Professor Rainer von Prost von Zeiten was forced to resign in disgrace because he had been found to systematically falsify on numerous Stone Age fossils, meaning Neanderthal. He was a Neanderthal expert. This is what they said. The commission finds that Professor Prost forged and manipulated scientific facts for the past 30 years, and the university said he was a widely recognized carbon dating expert. He dated this one guy at 23,000 or 21,000 years, who was only 3,300. So another guy he dated 27,400, and he was actually died in 1750. Now, this is what the scientists came out and said about this. We're going to have to rewrite all of prehistory. Now, I thought there were millions of guys out there working on this, and that one guy, everything's been validated 1,000 times by all the different scientists out there. One guy intentionally falsifies information, and we got to rewrite all of prehistory. Another guy says anthropology now has to revise its picture of modern man between 40,000 and 10,000 BC, all because of one guy. Here's the most damning statement. The university president, when he apologized, he said, a lot of people look the other way. Horse evolution. Everybody likes to talk about horse evolution. This is an Irish textbook, and we'll kind of blow through this a little bit. It said the evolution of the horse family was unintentionally falsified. This is 1950 when it was first discovered. Well, the classical early evolution of the horse tree was all wrong. That was 1951. They didn't get it straight yet. Never really happened. That's 1953. Much repeated gradual evolution of the modern horse have not held up under close scrutinization. That's 1992. If you go to one of the most preeminent universities in the country today, it's called Yale University, this is what you'll see on display. That was proven wrong over a half a century ago, yet it is still on display at one of the most preeminent universities in our country. Why would that be? Because the guy whose theory it was a teacher at Yale. Who said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the people? Adolf Hitler. We have discovered more than 1 trillion fossils now. We are 120 years past Darwin. We've got almost 250,000 species, and we really have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. David Rupp is the director of Field Museum in Chicago. He's not a Christian. He's an evolutionist. Here another guy, Colin Patterson at the London Museum of Natural History, laid on, there's not one such transitional fossil which you can make a watertight argument. Not one. The extreme rarity, this is another mouthpiece, that the extreme rarity of transitional fossils is the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbook have data only at the tips and the nodes. The rest is just inference. Whose inference? We're not sure. Fossil record is a hostile witness against evolution. 99%, this is one place where creationists and evolutionists would agree. 99.9% of all species are extinct. As a matter of fact, we would say that it's 99.9, evolutionists would say it's 99.99. It's close enough for me. If evolution is true and we're constantly evolving, we're all a new species. We really need to ponder this for a while. Really think about that. If evolution is true and we're still evolving, there should be as many species now as there was way back when. We keep evolving. Fossil record, that's not true either. Evolution is untrue and unprovable. The only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable. Is that science? I don't think so. So where do the dinosaurs fit in? We're going to have to hurry through this a little bit, guys, because here's humans, here's where dinosaurs are supposed to be. There's like a 250 million year gap here. Try to keep this in mind as we're going along. Dinosaur means terrible great lizard. All reptiles keep growing throughout their life. Is it possible that a dinosaur is just a replica, a reptile that is still growing? I'd give you an example of two living creatures today that look very similar to very old dinosaurs. I'm sorry. 1891, the dinosaur wasn't even in the American Dictionary. Dinosaurs are mentioned throughout history, just the name has changed. Dinosaur wasn't invented, the word wasn't invented until the early 1900s. Dragons, serpents, leviathans, behemoth. Since the term dinosaur was not invented until a couple thousand years after the Bible was written, your particular translation probably doesn't list it in the concordance, right? But if you find a Bible that's listed in the, was printed in the 19th century, you're going to see it about 34 times. Whether that is in Exodus, Deuteronomy, Nehemiah, Job, Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Deuteronomy 32, the wine is the poison of dragons. Job 41, sparks fly out of their mouth. Dragon, interesting. The number one definition in a dictionary is now rare. What does that mean? Now rare. Used to be here then, right? Job 40, behold now behemoth which I eat grass. We're talking about behemoth. You might have something like this, but in behemoth, some of your notes may say the elephant or hippopotamus. Well, let's take a little look at that. 40:16 says the strength is in his loins and the navel of his belly. Well, elephants have a big belly, I'll grant you that. So do hippopotamuses. So does he, right? He has a big belly. So does he. I'm not going to tell him that. He moves his tail like a cedar. Well, here I have a friend who's Lebanese, and this is a picture of him and his kids. That's a leader. This is one of the cedars of Lebanon you hear about in King Solomon's time building the temple. That's a cedar from Lebanon. I don't think that probably qualifies. I don't think that probably qualifies either. Now that's more like what it sounds like to me they were talking about here. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass, bars of iron. Well, here's a Bronchiosaurus toe bone. Here's the leg that goes with that bone. I think which one meets the definition a little better for you? The Bible has footnotes like this. Remember, the Bible text is inspired, not necessarily footnotes written by guys today. No human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Does the evidence support that statement? An Irish writer wrote that of an animal that had iron nails on its tail. Sounds a whole lot like the Kentrosaurus and the Stegosaurus, doesn't it? There are thousands of legends of people seeing or killing dragons. Alexander the Great wrote about it when he was conquering India. Here's a picture of an animal on a Egyptian tusk, an animal I've never seen. Here's another one. Maybe they call that necking. I don't know what that is, but it's a Greek. What's this guy in the middle? You know, we find that on wax scrolls. This is Babylon Kingdom. It's actually in a museum in Germany, but let's take a closer look at some of the animals that are imprinted on this wall. There's a U.S. soldier. Look what's on the wall behind him. Ica-stones. There's about 50,000 of these Ica-stones found out in Ica, Peru. Kind of interesting looking characters on some of these stones. All in one stone. They noticed something funny about it. They didn't know what these little circles were on there when they were talking about it. They couldn't figure that out, and they looked at it. The closer they looked at it, it's dinosaur skin, and when they found a piece of fossilized dinosaur skin. They've also found figurines and some other things down there. There's about 60,000 more found in Acambaro, Mexico in 1944 of these kind of figurines. They look like animals that we have around today. This is a mummy, and I wanted to show you some of the textile. I don't know, I haven't seen this guy. Here is a temple in Thailand, I think it's, or Cambodia. Let's take a little closer look at that thing. That sure looks like a stegosaurus to me, doesn't it? That's 1150 AD. If we look at some of the outrock rock, here almost side by side, looks like that look familiar? This is in Utah, on walls on a canyon in Utah. How about Viking ships? This is actually a sword from the Roman period. I'm going to show you the sword. It's hard to see it in the lower left-hand column. You can kind of see, let me flip back real quick, what you're looking for on that sword. You can see his tail swept up by the handle a little bit. Why would people from different parts of the world, different cultures with different backgrounds draw pictures or carved images of animals they've never seen? Is that logical? Is that reasonable? Well, I think if you saw one of these guys, it would make a very deep impression on you, right? Yeah. You would never forget it. Here's a coin from 1609 with showing a man slaying a dragon down on the ground there. Here's another one from 1606 showing a man slaying a dragon. Here's another coin from 1622 showing a man slaying a dragon. It's not like it was the thing to do back then was slay a dragon, 1600s. Here's a Russian medallion. By the way, the average dinosaur is about the size of a sheep. Crest of Lithuania. Dragons. Why would the Chinese have 11 real animals and one mythical one? Marco Polo talks about dragons in his writings. Dinosaurs and human footprints have been found all along Turkmenistan and Arizona. I'll give you a closer look at that. You can see the human footprint walking away and the dinosaur footprint walking to you. This is called the Taylor Trail. Here is one with a human footprint inside a dinosaur footprint. A little closer look at, you can kind of see the toes on the human footprint inside the pterosaurus track. Here's one where they actually did this, and I want to show you real quick. A lot of times they'll tell you, hey, you guys carved those footprints in there, but that's what this is right here. This contour following the contours, falsifying the thing. If you carved it in there, there would be no contours back in here. They did a CAT scan through this thing to show you, here's the dinosaur track, here's a human cracker. That would say that they were living at the same time, wouldn't it? Here's the real reason dinosaurs are extinct. I know, Gary Larson hit it on the head. What do we do with all this contradicting evidence? That's really the question, is what would reasonable men do? Well, if I see this, I'm going to say, let's at least engage and join in the process. Here's what Isaac Asimov said. He said, creationists are stupid, lying people who are not to be trusted in any way, and all of their points are equally stupid except where they're just creationists are outright lying. There's another guy that used to be where I used to live up there. Anyone holding the creationist viewpoint must be illogical, backward, subversive, uneducated, and stubborn. I'll agree on the stubborn part. Now, the guys that talk about creationists having their trouble getting their point across, they complain that the theories are being discriminated against. This guy says, as a matter of fact, they should be discriminated against. All right? That's propaganda. So they should be dismissed, fired. If you get a degree and you espouse creationism, they want to retroactively take your degree from you. I could not myself consider that a teacher had much of a grasp on reality if she believed in creationism. This is no point in reviewing information on both sides. Creation was a leftover from very primitive folklore. Is this scientist or outright bigotry? The evolutionist, knowledge is king. Science is the ultimate pursuit of learning and knowledge. The Bible says in 2 Timothy, they're always learning but never able to acknowledge the truth. Colossians 2 says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ. Those who oppose him we must gently instruct, not get face to face and yelling and screaming. For the wages of sin and death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Jesus Christ our Lord. Romans 6:23. Jesus said, I told you that you would die in your sins. If you do not believe that I am the one I claim to be, you will indeed die in your sins. Judgment day is coming, fellas. What will you say on that day? Thank you very much. We're sorry we ran over and had trouble with the things. Like I said, if this got some interest in this, I've got these things up here. They're $5 a piece. If you guys want something to read, if you want to look at some of the more of this information here, it all didn't come out of here. And like I said, if you want a DVD of this presentation, essentially what it is, they're $5 here too. And I don't care if you reproduce this 100 times and give it to all your friends. I don't care about it. There's no copyright on this. If you want to grab one of those for your friends or your neighbor or somebody you want to witness to, you're more than welcome to. I appreciate your time, guys, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Well, I trust this message has provided some practical encouragement for you on your journey with Christ. Please visit noblewarriors.org to learn more about how Noble Warriors works to help churches reach and build men. God bless you, friend.